So, Mr. Karins, the war in Ukraine appears to have settled into something of a stalemate. The Ukrainians have not been advancing as they hoped, nor have the Russians. What is your assessment of the war situation now, and how worried are you about it?
Well, the situation is undoubtedly very tough. Ukraine was not able to advance as fast as they would have wanted. I think it has a lot to do with lack of weapon systems at the time, maybe some training. And because all of that took time, the Russians had time to dig in. But undoubtedly, the Ukrainians are quite adept at doing things cleverly. So they're not looking to sacrifice Ukrainian lives. They're actually looking to save Ukrainian lives. That's the big difference between Ukraine and Russia. Russia seems to be not caring about the lives of their young soldiers. But with better and more advanced weapons, the Ukrainians are actually quite capable of making the supply chains for the Russian army much more difficult to sustain. And if they can weaken the supply chain enough, that also will help them to make ground advances. But we understand in Latvia that the situation is such that it will not happen very quickly, but that makes it all the more important for us in the West to continue to support Ukraine, to continue to train Ukrainian soldiers, to provide them with money, to provide them with weapons and ammunition, humanitarian medical aid, so that they can keep up the fight. Because one thing is very clear, the Ukrainian spirit to maintain their independence and to regain their country is alive and well.
So we know that Latvia, like the other Baltic nations, was very alarmed when Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine last year. Your country borders both Russia and its ally Belarus. I read that you're buying missile systems, rocket systems from the United States, beefing up your military. How alarmed would you say that Latvians are now, 18 months on, and how is the situation in terms of the mood at home developing?
Well, the mood at home is, of course, people are concerned. I think everyone is concerned. But we take our concern into direct action. So next year we'll be spending 2.4% of our budget, of our GDP on the defense of our country. This will be moving up to 3% of GDP by 27. So we're investing. We've reinstated the draft. We're in the process of buying 3 new weapon systems. So from Germany, the Iris-T air defense system, and then from the US, the HIMARS systems with the ATACMS missiles, and coastal defense systems. We in Latvia are part of the NATO EFP. So as we've been beefing up our own defenses, so have our partners. We're under the framework of Canada. Canada has pledged money in their budget. They are sending additional tanks, additional troops and capabilities. The Spanish, the Italians, and others as well. So NATO is increasing its footprint. We're in the process of developing a new military base, which is going to be quite larger than any existing military base in Latvia or even in the Baltic region, so that not only our army but our NATO allies have plenty of room to train, to learn maneuvers, etc., etc. So we are upping our game in response to the very real threat that Russia poses to all of Europe. But within the European Union and within NATO, we are among very good friends and allies, but we are doing every bit our part and trying to do proportionally more.
So I must ask you about the conflict between Israel and Hamas as well. How concerned are you that might take attention away, or perhaps is already taking attention away from the war in Ukraine?
Well, it already has taken media attention away, but it has not had any effect on Europe's commitment to continuing to support Ukraine. So that's in line, that's moving forward. NATO allies are moving forward. Insofar as that's concerned, no changes. But of course, there is a certain concern, and this is what about public opinion and public support? Because governments in democracies, we work as long as we have the general backing of our populations. And if the public becomes very distracted with something else, it could start to lose somehow the focus and attention on Ukraine. But the war in Ukraine has not died down. As a matter of fact, since Hamas started its attack, Russia has been launching or trying to launch counterattacks in Ukraine, to date unsuccessfully, but they're putting in a lot more pressure on the Ukrainian military. The Russians are suffering heavy losses, but the pressure has been increasing, and it seems that they are using, in a sense, the cover of no one is paying attention to try to change the tide of the war there. So the situation is very serious, and what's important that we have the Israel-Hamas war going on, and maybe some other conflict in the world will come up. We're living in such times, but we as democracies, we're actually quite capable of handling many issues at once. You know, we're all actually multitaskers, and what's important is that we don't lose sight of the importance of continuing to support Ukraine, no matter what happens elsewhere in the world.
Just focusing on the Middle East specifically, what is your sense as Latvian Foreign Minister? Is there a danger of a spread, is there a serious danger of a spread of that conflict to the wider region, do you think?
Of course, there's that risk, and the risk is that Israel's war against Hamas gets perceived in the Arab world as Israel fighting Arabs. And then Arab countries, not only governments, say Iran and Hezbollah in Lebanon, but so we say the street becoming more and more agitated. And this is a very real concern. We see what the U.S. government is doing with moving their armed forces, the carriers in the region, to send a very clear signal of what the U.S. Thinks about that. But the threat is unfortunately quite real. We're very well aware that the conflict is not new. It's just the latest iteration. It's an extremely brutal iteration. And what's coming out of what Hamas actually has done to the people it killed, it's sheer barbarism. But that does not mean that it will be easy to maintain, and because Israel, in fighting Hamas is hiding behind human shields and literally under human shields, that it's very difficult for the Israeli defense forces to fight Hamas completely avoiding any or all civilian casualty risk. Not because of Israel, but because of how Hamas is conducting the war.
Yeah, having said all that, do you feel that the European Union is doing the right things to bring peace about, if possible, or at least bring some sort of rationality into this conflict?
I think the European Union can and should raise its voice much stronger on the need to push for a two-state solution. We have to look also beyond this conflict of what could actually defuse and bring down the draw of Hamas to young Palestinians. And that would, of course, be creating a Palestinian state where someone young could think about how to build a country instead of how to maybe fight against another one. And this is where I think Europe has a lot to say. We have a collective clout to do this. Our stated public statements seem to be a little disjointed, but it's only because some of us are putting the emphasis more on supporting Israel as a country under attack, which my country does as well, and at the same time expressing a concern about innocent civilian lives in Gaza, and they're not incompatible views. Actually, they're both part of the same problem. And one can fully support Israel and still feel compassion for Palestinians and think about how we can humanitarily help them. But what we all are united in Europe is on a two-state solution. And this is something that I think we should bring to the diplomatic table much more strongly as a union.
And bringing it back to Europe, we've seen a rise in antisemitism across the continent. We've seen a polarization, I think, in many societies with different groups of people who support the different sides in this conflict. Is that affecting your country, and what do you think this kind of development would mean for the future of Europe?
Well, thankfully in my country we're not feeling that, but any conflict, especially one in such a controversial area geographically as the Middle East, has a lot of emotion. And this is a grave difficulty for all of us in Europe. We're quite removed, but we have communities of Palestinians, of Arabs living in our countries, and of course we have Jews living in our countries as well. And the potential for conflict is there, but where I think it's important for governments to send out the signal to their populations that one, aggression or intolerance against one or another ethnic or religious group is simply non-acceptable in our societies. This has to be very clear. Everyone has to feel safe. You cannot feel unsafe because you're a Palestinian or because you're Jewish, but also to send out a clearer message of what it is that we want. And if we in Europe speak more clearly that we want a two-state solution, then maybe we could get also the public to think more about what we need to build instead of how maybe we need to stand against one another. That's completely fruitless, but actually we do have something to offer, and I think we need to offer it much more clearly and much more strongly.
So just coming now to the questions that you've been in Berlin today to discuss with other foreign ministers the future of the European Union. Annalena Baerbock, the German foreign minister, has said again that she believes Ukraine should become a European Union member. She's expecting statements on that at the European Summit in December later this year. Do you think that's the right sort of timetable, the right pace for that step to happen?
Yes, I do. And I share my views on this matter with Annalena, that in Europe we have to look at it also differently. What would happen if we don't look to expand? And when you do that analysis, you see nothing good coming out of it. Ukraine is fighting a war over the values that we take for granted in Latvia, in Germany. Freedom, democracy, rule of law. You cannot simply be arrested. You cannot simply, have your property taken away from you. You have a system that protects you as an individual. And this is what the Ukrainians are fighting for when they continually say they just want to live like us. And in Latvia, we understand this because for many years we said we just want to live like the Germans, to live a normal life. And we are living that normal life. But it's important that we open up our doors to the possibility of a country such as Ukraine to come into the European family. That does not mean that they don't have to do reforms and make sure their justice system and everything is up to speed. And the Ukrainians agree to that. But it's making sure that from our side, it's not because we don't want that, but it should be we do want that. And then we have to help them, Ukraine and other countries, to actually be able to fully join the European family.
Yeah, I mean, there are quite a few other countries in the queue to get European Union membership, like Moldova, like several countries in the Western Balkans. What about enlargement? Won't it make decision-making in the European Union even more difficult? And is there a threat that democratic standards could be watered down in an attempt to make sure that President Putin doesn't somehow drive a wedge between those countries and the
No,
EU?
it's very clear that our union is a union of values. So the democratic standards, the rule of law issues, this is what binds us. This is, if we don't have that, this is what could disunite us. So this remains as a base criteria. And this is what we talked about at today's meeting. Everyone around the table, current members and aspiring members, everyone agrees to that. Now, the main thing is to making it happen. But remember, if we open up formal negotiations with the country, it doesn't mean that they become a member tomorrow. It means the process begins. And just as families, when a child is conceived, we're given 9 months to sort of get ready, and then 18 years to try to figure it out as they grow up. Well, it's the same here. As we open up the door to possible EU expansion, we have time and opportunity to think, how could we run our union more efficiently? What are the troubles and the difficult ways in decision making, and what can we improve? And again, I see no contradiction. With or without expansion, I think we need to improve our decision making process. So as we do that, then we negotiate with the candidate countries, and they make reforms. And it can all come together. It's not either one or the other, and you can, and indeed you must do both, because the cost for us as Europeans of not doing that, those are quite dire. And unfortunately, in the east of Europe, the notion of a gray zone really doesn't exist. It's either the European Union and democratic values, or there's Russia, which has blatant imperialistic aspirations and is now in the process of trying to annihilate one of its neighbors, Ukraine. It cannot succeed. It will not succeed in doing this, but that does not mean that they're inflicting incredible damage.
And finally, the German Foreign Minister also said now is the time to plough ahead with what she called tedious internal reforms of the European Union, also at the level of Brussels as well as the member states. Do you think that's feasible? Is now the time to do that, and can it work?
Yes, and I think it's something we have to do. We have to be aware that the world is changing. It has become much more dangerous. There's this, geopolitics is something that all politicians and many commentators are speaking about. It's actually very real. So in light of the geopolitical reality, we simply have to change and improve the way we do things. And I don't think it's unrealistic. I don't think that we need to necessarily open up our European treaties and go through this process. That's a 5, 6, 7 year process that can actually end up nowhere, because it needs to be ratified in every country, and some countries will have referendum. We don't even need that. Actually, there's plenty to do within the existing treaties where we could improve the way we come to decisions. And it's not impossible. Doesn't mean it's easy. It is difficult. But what is much more difficult is in not doing it. It's like with Ukraine. It seems expensive to support Ukraine now, but it would be much more expensive to fight a war with Russia. So it's much cheaper to help Ukraine. Similarly, it's difficult to improve the way we make decisions in Europe, but the cost of not doing that will be quite large indeed.
Mr. Karins, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.